from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, right here in the African-American-owned broadcasting studio. WeBelieveDigital.com, our own platform. And so it's critically important that in the African-American community, we control the narrative. I look forward to receiving opportunities to show and advertise your products for goods and services and to move your brand along in this community. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. On We Believe Digital Podcast, go to Roku and download our app, and We Believe Global, with shows like this to bring articulate, intelligent conversations and dialogue to our platform. So I'm here to continue sounding the alarm. This is how the South is going to rise again. Good evening, and welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live right here from Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the deep, deep South. Jackson, Mississippi, the capital of the great state of Mississippi. You know, Mississippi has about 3 million people that reside in this great state. 40+% of those people are African Americans. There was a time in Mississippi when we had more African Americans than we had whites. There were more black folk in Mississippi than white folk. There was a time in Mississippi when we had all Indians before we had anybody. And so times change, populations shift, things occur. New leadership is appointed, and sometimes it's anointed. And Jackson, Mississippi is going through some crisis times right now. Now, many of you have heard about all of the trouble we've had with our water distribution system. So bad until some of our citizens who are going without water for extended periods of time due to an aged infrastructure that had been neglected for the last 100 years. In some parts of our cities, we still had clay pipes. That's how bad it was, and continues to be. And so mayor after mayor after mayor have been let me explain something. They haven't been kicking the can down the road. Jackson does not have the revenue to fix all of its issues and has not had that for quite some time. Now, we here at We Believe Digital are going to try and educate you on what's going on in this great city. And we're going to try to come up with some solutions that need to be implemented by the citizens of Jackson, Mississippi, and carried out by the elected officials. Citizens call the play, elected officials carry the plays out. And if they don't carry the plays out successfully, then they are pulled from the game and put on the bench. And so we're at a point now in Jackson, Mississippi, where we're going to see the coach get up and go to the mound and ask for the ball. There will be no debate, no conversation. As in baseball, you simply give the ball to the coach and walk off the mound. Your time is up. And so we're going to talk about these things right here in Jackson, Mississippi. But first, let me let you know who we are. This is We Believe Digital Broadcasting Studio. And we're broadcasting live all over the world in more than 139 countries. We're being seen on YouTube, on Facebook, on Roku TV, and our very own platform, WeBelieveDigital.com. Now, WeBelieveDigital.com is a little bit different than most platforms. One is that we afford and offer opportunities to the black community to get their message out. It's very affordable. Our podcast studio is available to all of you that want to take advantage of it. The rates are so reasonable until you'll leave tips when you depart. We Believe Digital Podcast Studio. Now, WeBelieveDigital.com, our very own platform, consists of about 10 different categories on where we house interesting information and shows. One of those categories is the inspiration category. Under there, you will find some of the most inspiring work that our ministers and our religious leaders have ever done. You might have the category of politics. You can go there and see what's happening in that area if it interests you. We have lifestyles, things of that nature. Now, We Believe Digital is a little bit different because you see, in our categories, we have various channels. Otherwise, the New Horizon Church has its own channel. I mean, all of its shows are housed in its own channel. And New Jerusalem Church has its own channel. Now, check this out. On Sunday morning at 8 o'clock on WeBelieveDigital.com, you could watch both the New Horizon show and the New Jerusalem show at the same time. Now, you can't do that with traditional media. I mean, if you want to be on Channel 3 at 8 o'clock, then you buy 8 o'clock hour and no one else can be seen in that hour. So that's the difference. And so We Believe Digital is embarking upon some very new and exciting concepts and ideas. Now, when you go to that website and that platform and you scroll down, you'll see We Believe Radio. Now, We Believe Radio, if you go there, you'll listen to some of the best music, soul-stirring music that will remind you of your days when you were back in the SIP. Most of you out there came from there anyway. If not, you came from Alabama. And so you'll enjoy We Believe Radio. So what's going to happen? Let you share this vision for you so that you can support this concept. What's going to happen is that all of our podcast shows will be seen in our broadcast studio and they will be heard on our radio station. You know, we're trying to do some wonderful things over here, and we have some very smart people that are making this come into fruition. And one day we're going to be the premier source of information. You know, on that 8 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news now, when you look at it, 80% of the time is spent covering things that have to do with black folk. Unfortunately, most of it is negative. We spend a lot of time on who shot who and on crime. Very little time on who is doing something positive and the impact that they're having on this great state. We don't see much of that. And so We Believe Digital is going to stand in the gap. We're going to house your information for you. We're going to chronicle your successes and your failures. And it's going to be there for generations to come so they'll see what was it really like in 2023 down in Mississippi. And your great-great-great-granddaddy was in a major struggle for your future. You'll get a chance to see that here at We Believe Digital. Now, this program is also sponsored by Socrates, Garrett Enterprises, which specializes in demolition services. We demolish more houses and buildings than any other African-American firm in this region. Just last week, even as earlier this week, we were invited down to Grand Gulf Nuclear Center to look at demolishing some buildings down at the nuclear station. We've done this work all in Minot, North Dakota. We've done this work in Puerto Rico. We've done this work in the Virgin Islands. We've done this work in Houston, Texas, down in Corpus Christi. We've done this work down in Beaumont. We've done this work all over the country. So if you have a project out there, you need a demolition services, then you give us a call. The number is 601-209-9199. We appreciate Socrates Garrett Enterprises for the contribution that they make to the community and for sponsoring this show. Another one of our great sponsors is Earth Blend Coffee, the only African-American owned roasting operation in the entire southern region. That's right. You see, we attract the attention of African-American businesses that are trying to do things uniquely different than what traditionally has been done. And I've always, as an entrepreneur, wanted to wade into waters that were deeper than we've waded into before, to go into areas that traditionally we have not gone. This is part of my DNA. And so we're trying a lot of different things over here. But you try Earth Blend Coffee. You go to earthblendcoffee.co and you order some great coffee. You'll enjoy it. Now, as always, I have with me my guest, and a gentleman that has turned this country upside down. He's a gentleman that I like to say was born on a plantation, and now he's Dr. Eldridge Henderson. He's a renowned speaker and orator that's sought after throughout this entire country. Dr. Henderson, it's always good to have you in the studio, sir. How have you been?
Well, thank you, Mr. Socrates. I've been doing well here recently. I'm just waiting for the next day. I live for the next day. I don't worry about today. I live for the next day so I can tell people how they can solve their problems in 30, 60, or 90 days, guaranteed.
Well, doctor, people have a lot of problems.
They have a lot of them, for sure.
And so I want to get into some of that and some of the solutions, but because African-American history is not taught in our school system, the critical race theory is banned from public education in the state of Mississippi by the legislature, the elected officials led by the governor. It's banned, and so we don't get a lot of African-American history being taught in our school system. So the little bit that they do get out there comes from programs like this. So I want to take a moment, and I want to go back, and I want you to tell us a little bit about African-American history from the time we came over on the boats. You know, exactly, you know, share with us a little bit so that our children will have some insight as to how they got here.
Okay, viewers and listeners, I want to tell you that we have a long history in America, and especially in what I call the southern region. The question is, when did black people first get over here in Mississippi or the southern region? Believe it or not, it wasn't during slavery. The old history books will show you, you're not in the public school history books, but if you look at some of the old journals and old newspapers, you will find that black folks were here in the 1500s as explorers and as citizens, as they call it, regional citizen without permanent governments. They were surviving. They had small communities, and they were scouts for the Europeans later on. And then around the mid-1600s, roughly around 1619 first, that's when we were codified and legalized as non-humans, and the word that they gave us was slaves. And I'm going to use that word very simply and not tell you what else we were called, such as non-humans, savages. And they decided that since the black people were of a dark hue, that they would be better slaves than the first two groups they had. The first one were the so-called Native Americans, Mr. Socrates. Those guys are the first people that were here. You mentioned that earlier in your introduction. And they were what we call basically colored people during that time. And if you look at the old American Indians, you will find that most of them were colored types. They had what we call a darker hue. And they tried to put those guys in slavery. It didn't work because they had so many thousands throughout this region in the South and in other parts of the country until they were able to get tired of this. And they got out of slavery by two reasons. One, they worked them to death. And number two, a lot of them escaped. And they moved with their neighbors, other Indian groups and tribes throughout the Mississippi region, Louisiana, Alabama, and some went to other areas and joined up with the Indians and lived independently, roaming the country, fishing and hunting. But of course, the Europeans didn't like that. They also had a problem with another group called indentured servants. That was their relatives and friends and old poor people, prostitutes, mentally ill people from Europe that were living in the ghetto. Homelessness was pervasive in Europe during that time. So a lot of the rich people got together and say, we got to get rid of these people, and we got to find somewhere to take them. And I'm going to make it simple so the third graders can understand. They decided with the legislatures, parliament and others, the kings were dominant during those periods, had a few queens here and there, and they made the rule that you put them on a ship and take them to the new land, to the new world, which was considered then America. And eventually they created something called the colonists and put those indentured servants there and worked them 5 to 7 years and gave them some independence. So they lost out on those folks. And during that time, they were experimenting with black folks. I told you that started around 1619. And black people were already conditioned to hard work. They cared nothing about the sun. The longer a black person worked in the sun, the stronger he got. It didn't kill him. It just made him strong. Now, I'm just exaggerating just a little bit, but sun doesn't hurt black folks. It's good for the skin, good for the heart. They learn to breathe better. They live a long time. Hard work has never killed a black person, never. Black person that's normal and in decent health can work 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week if necessary. But the bad part about the slaves, and this is very serious, Mr. Socrates, they had nowhere to go. The indentured servants that were slaves with them, when they turned them loose, they declared themselves white, and many of them were already white. They gave them food, clothing, weapons, a few grains, and many times they gave them implements where they can get their own land. Gave them land sites. Today we call it reparations that black people are asking for, which they're not going to get anytime soon. So they married within the other whites that were there, the lower class people that were not indentured servants, and he gradually built a base where all the white Europeans, formerly slaves that we called indentured servants, the Indians that moved and stayed around close to the colonies that integrated by birth with the whites, all declared that they were superior to the poor slaves because he couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't hide and run away and not be seen because slaves were all basically the same color until they created that new slave that I talk about from time to time.
Well,
Black man couldn't hide, man. He could not hide.
We're going to talk about the new slave and the new man that you like to talk about, but you brought up some interesting things, and we're talking history here now, and we want to understand the origins of man a little bit better. Now, Doc, you mentioned that Africans were dark-skinned and the sun didn't hurt them, and that they could breathe better. They had larger nostrils and thicker lips, and they were able to withstand and work in various conditions. Now, some say that, if you were born in Africa, if you grew up in that region, that you had to have those characteristics in order to survive the heat.
That's true.
And so white folk have a different set of features, Doc. They have thinner lips and smaller nostrils, and that was beneficial to the part of the country that they came from. And so in a colder environment, in the mountains, etc. And so nature has a way for you to develop the necessary attributes to survive in your climate.
Exactly.
There are some fish, Doc, that don't have eyes because it's dark wherever they are. There's nothing to see, so they lose their ability, and eventually the DNA removes the eyes because they're not needed. And so nature will make you into the person that is required to survive in the environment that you're in. Am I wrong here, Doc?
You are 100% correct. And that's what's wrong with the black man today. He has been reinvented and told that he is not worthy of being a human being, but that's only from about 500 or 600 years ago. And we're not going to go too deep in history, but everybody knows, everyone knows that even heard the rumor that the black people were the original man, and in the African area, they had big libraries, they had good government, they had medical doctors, scientists, architects, all kinds of smart people that could do anything that would need to be done. If they had a problem with a big rain, they created irrigation system. They knew how to build dams and so forth. They knew how to let the water go into the farm area and get it off, and then they had the greatest food source in the world. And then those folks you talked about that were up in the rural area, up in the mountains, the Ural Mountains and so forth in Europe, when they start coming out of those caves, they saw those people. Who are those people? What are they doing? We want what they have. And the Europeans that I am familiar with through history have always said, we don't have what we want, but we know what we want, and we're going to get it.
We're going to take it.
We're going to take it.
By any means
necessary.
Now we're up against a commercial break. I hope you're enjoying this discussion. You know, it's one that we need to have. You're not having it around the dinner tables anymore, so you don't have any place to learn who you are and where you came from. But we're going to continue this conversation right after this commercial. You stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Looking for the hottest content in the city of Jackson and surrounding areas? Check out WeBelieveDigital.com. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We Believe Digital Podcast is here for all your podcasting needs.
Have you had your Earthblend coffee today? At Earthblend Coffee, we take pride in offering you the very best of beans across the world, blended and roasted to perfection, giving you superior quality and satisfying and flavorful taste. Experience the world in one cup with Earthblend Coffee. To order, visit earthblendcoffee.co now.
Welcome back to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi. Dr. Henderson and I have been having a great conversation. A conversation that needs to be had all over the world. All black children need to hear this conversation. And a lot of black adults need to hear this conversation because they have no idea who they are, where they came from, and what value and what traditions and legacy that belong to them. They have no earthly idea. It was taken from them many, many years ago. And so Dr. Henderson moves up on something now that he calls a new man. Now, we're going to have him explain what he means by a new man. And I want you to listen very carefully because it may give you some insight into why we have the problems that we do inside of our race. It may give you some insight as to why it is so difficult for us to work together, for us to come together to solve common problems. It may give us some insight as to why we have so many broken homes and so many children that are absent from the household where there is a man and a woman. All of these things occur because of conditions and policies. And if we want to fix it, you cannot fix something if you don't know why or how it's broken. It's just critically important to understand, where did the break occur? I mean, if you got a water line and you know that you're losing water at your faucet in your home, and you want to fix the leak, but the line is 10 miles long. Until you identify where the leak is, then you can't repair the line. It's the same thing with history and mankind. Until you identify where we went wrong, where you got to go back to say we were on track at some point, and that track, being on track at some point, may be all the way back in Africa. I don't know, but we're going to talk about it. But I know that as a boy in my community, that there was a traditional family in place. They had a man, they had a woman, and they had children, lots of children. Men often had multiple families and lots of children. And the responsibility to take care of those families belonged to him. And we saw that a lot of times, Big Joe and Little Joe in my community. So we got to go back and see the natural order of things and where we went wrong. But we're going to go back to Dr. Henderson now, and we're going to talk about this new man. What does he mean by that? Dr. Henderson, what is the origin of a new man?
Well, the origin of a new man is briefly stated in some books and some theories that anywhere a man goes into a new area, a new climate, he is going to interact with the natives, so to speak. And he is going to start families with the natives. He is going to prioritize those new people as part of him. He is going to create favorites and give them access to some of his responsibilities and put them in charge to be supervising their own relatives on the other side. Those that he birthed, that he interact with the slaves or the people in that community, are going to be new people. They are his sons, his daughters, his grandchildren, and they usually have a different color than the original people in that community. They are going to have, and history shows it today, I got a lot of relatives like that, you're going to find that European hue. They're usually a little more lighter. Their hair is similar to Europeans. And when they are born and they are given favored treatment, in many cases, unless they are rebellious, they then are told that I'm going to give you a better job because I want you to be my right-hand person in the house. I want you to drive me in the carriage where I need to go. I want you to work in the shop and fix the wagons and so forth. I want you, when you get a little time and a little training, I'm going to put you in as a supervisor on the plantation and let you keep the workers moving with the whip. Yes, sir, boss. Yes, sir. But if you don't do it, I'm going to sell you. I'm going to send you down the river. Now, that's the case. Those people believed that they were a little better. And this started back in the 7 to 1800, when the Moors, you know, some black Africans, moved from Africa up in northwest Italy, around Sicily and others. They ruled that area from about 700 to about 1400. And they did the same thing, and that's why a lot of Italians from northwest Italy were considered colored. They are a little darker than the other Europeans in the other parts of Europe, where those Moors didn't take over. They ruled that country from about 750 to about 1400. And you look at the colors, positions of those northwestern Italians. And when a lot of them came to America, they were discriminated against because they were too colored, too non-European. But they too did the same thing. When they got here in America, they integrated into the Europeans that were here. And gradually, their color changed. And now you don't see too many current Italians in America that could pass for black.
Now, Doc, let me ask you, let's go, this is interesting. Let's go back for a minute. Now, as a student, as a boy growing up, I believe I understood that there were 5 classes of people. Doc, there was the Caucasians, as I recall, I was taught. There were the Africans. There were the Asians. There were the Indians, and maybe there were the Chinese, if they weren't Asians. I'm not sure, Doc, and that's just 5 groups of people.
But they lumped all those Asians together during that time. Just like now they lump all blacks together, and there's a lot of differences in these groups.
So there were 4 distinct categories of races, of groups, of 5?
That's right. Well, in my time, I'm older than you. You had blacks, whites, and Indians, and others. You had really 4 groups.
Black, white, Indians, and Asians.
They had the Chinese, the Japanese, all of them that were over here, they grouped them together.
So you had 4?
That's right. So they didn't talk too much about the Hispanics during that time.
Well, I was about to ask you, then a Hispanic has to come out of one of these 4?
Well, they had their own nation at the time. They had part of what is called the United States now, California, Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, Florida. All of those areas were belonging at that time to Mexico and the Indians.
Well, so now were those Spaniards, or that part of Spain?
Basically, they were Spaniards that spoke Spanish. But the Mexicans, what I call from South America, were a #1 group that had their own country, which is today called Mexico.
Mexico.
That's right.
And so, but is there a difference between a Mexican and a Hispanic?
Well, they say it is, and I say too. They fall in a lot of different categories, like black folks. You know, you have the darker Hispanics. You have those that integrated more with the white ones, so they don't like to be called that. They want to be Europeans. They look like them, dress like them, talk like them, and all that kind of thing, and treat their own relatives and friends like slaves.
So Doc, I disagree with you about blacks. Blacks are black. I don't care where you are in America. One drop of black blood, and you get categorized as.
Well, I know that. The other group I'm talking about, they deny that. See, there are certain groups that deny it.
So you talk about this new man. Now, one of the things that every group that we've talked about, Doc, they have a homeland. They recognize that that's where they're from. The Africans, the mulattoes that you were talking about now, that have the descendants of white people primarily, they created a new man. He's not from Africa. You do his family tree, and he doesn't go back to Africa.
That's correct.
So if you got a man here that is not a descendant of Africa, can't trace his DNA back there, and he's not accepted anywhere else in the world, he is truly a man without a country.
And he is a man that's dangerous. Those kind of blacks and others are dangerous individuals. They will turn their backs on their kind in a minute if they are given an opportunity by their white fathers, brothers, sisters, and grandparents.
They would have more allegiance to their Caucasian ancestry than they would for their black lineage.
Of course, that's human nature. You love the people or your parents, that are your brothers and sisters, whether it's legal or not. You have a tendency because they treat you a little better. You get better food, better shelter, less abuse. Unless you have a lot of radicals in the group, which there are many, that will abuse anybody. Because a lot of those people abuse their sons and daughters, you know that,
yeah,
and created all kind of problems.
Now, Doc, I've studied history, and I've found that mulattoes have led the fight against the Europeans more diligently than black folk have. For example, I remind you of Frederick Douglass, who we look at as probably the #1 black person that fought for the liberation of black people, had a white daddy and a black mama.
That's correct. But there's a reason why he was different. Now,
and I want, when you explain that, I want you to also explain to me if that's not the same characteristic that Du Bois had.
Well, Douglass was a strong advocate for black people. He was considered an abolitionist. He wanted to end slavery. And he wanted the slaves to remain in America, not get on a boat and go to Liberia somewhere.
Like Marcus Garvey wanted.
That's right.
Marcus Garvey was a big black man.
Looked like tar, that's right.
But
jet black. If he would close his eyes, you couldn't see him at night.
But Frederick Douglass was a fair-skinned African.
That's right.
So the real dark-skinned African, Marcus Garvey, said we need to go back to Africa. You see where I'm going?
I see exactly where you're going.
The Africans that knew where he came from said we need to go home. But Frederick Douglass never wanted to go back to Africa.
Well, he didn't know anything about Africa. He was not taught anything about Africa. The only reason, in my opinion, and the little study that I've done about him, is because he didn't know anything about Africa when he was a young man up until he got out of slavery and started reading and so forth. So all he knew was America. And the reason he was so anti-white during that period and wants slaves to be free, they treated him worse than a dog from when he was a little boy. They used to beat him and torture him. He ran away and they almost killed him. And when he was in his late teens, he got away the last time. And he learned from that experience that I don't want anybody going through this, and we're going to have to fight for freedom. And he was very vocal about this. A self-taught man that used the old black strategy to learn how to read and write from black kids, told them, you can't tell me what that is when you look at the book. Start writing and trying to count, do the numbers. I bet you know what that next number is. Little white boy girl, yeah, that's 3, that's 4. No, that's not right, Fred, or whatever they called it. Now, this is just a simple example how he learned to read and write. But he was a genius. And once he got off that plantation and moved around in the circles in the North, he would speak about his experience. And he was one of the greatest orators during his time.
So where did his genius come from? Did it come from his white daddy, or did it come from his black mama?
No, it came from his experience and his hatred from his condition, because he was a man of average intelligence that had a desire to learn more and do more because of how he was treated. If you are sugar-coated and treated equally and given everything you want, you have a tendency to be what I call below normal. You're average or slightly below average. You're not going to want much change in your life. You want food, clothing, and shelter.
So, Doc, let's stay here for a moment, because this is interesting to me. Now, Du Bois was a fair-skinned African-American as well, like Frederick Douglass.
Correct.
And so Du Bois comes up with this theory that he only needed the talented tenth.
That's right. That's the white man concept. The talented tenth. Usually, if you look at the history, I hate to just tell you these things over and over, the talented tenth was usually the sons and daughters and granddaughters of the white Europeans, and especially the plantation owners, and many of those in the North had these black families, and especially most of them in the South. And Du Bois was one. He was what we call sort of high yellow. He had an opportunity to get a good education. He too, like genius, he was a genius. And he went to Harvard and got a PhD after he left a black college. And eventually, when he found out he was considered a real black man, he was so disillusioned, he decided to leave America and went to Africa and died in Africa. He said, I'm wrong about these people. I thought they loved me. I started an organization called NAACP. He was one of those founders. I done begged them folks to help me. They have given me money. They have given me speeches and talking points for 50 years. And now I've found that I am an outcast because I said a few things about white folks that I don't like, and that is people like me need independence. So the talented tenths to him were those high yellow blacks that had a little college education, and that's why he hated old Booker T. Washington so, because he had a totally different idea on what black folks need to do.
Well, I was going to get to Booker T. He had this theory of you need to let your buckets down where you are. He was a different kind of guy that seemed to want to build the African American up regardless to his skin color.
That's right. And he says, in many words, I'm going to make it third graders again, so the third graders can understand. Booker T says, at this time, white folks, we've been out of slavery just a few years. And we have so many problems. We have no money. You know, I talked to you about the NOS some time ago, the NOS. No money, no home, no education, no training, no real training, no country, no nothing. So you just leave us alone, and I'm going to get some schools set up and teach people, black people specifically, how to be men, how to work with their hands. We don't need nobody up at the big university at Harvard or Yale or Princeton. They only let one or two go anyway, and they were the ancestors of the white Europeans, the few that got to those places. So that's the difference.
Doc, so we have this divide.
Always had it.
We've had it from day one. We've had this divide, and so today we find that it's hard for us to come together as people.
And let me tell you why. Because the divide is there, and this divide is by design. The white folks supported both. Du Bois, when he started his organization, that's who financed the NAACP. And
are you telling me white folk financed the NAACP?
That's right. Most of the money came from white folks, white rich people. And they had the president of the NAACP in many years were white. The only spokesperson...
Are you trying to tell me that the NAACP had white presidents?
They had white presidents, whites on the board, and over 75% of their funding came from white individuals and white groups. Read the history.
Now, Doc,
and up until years after a while, they finally got a black man who was really white to be the executive secretary of the NAACP, and believe it or not, his last name was White. I forget White's first name, but he was a white guy that could go to a Ku Klux Klan meeting and not even be recognized.
Doc, we are up against a commercial break. You know, these conversations are critically important. They need to be had. They need to be talked about. This show, Dr. Henderson and I, should be recorded and replayed all over America. It's critically important that we understand where this divide came from and why it's there and why we can't come together as a people today. But we're up against a commercial break. So we want you to stay tuned, and we're going to come back for our last segment, and we're going to bring this conversation into the 21st century. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Socrates Garrett ENT.com is a diversified firm specializing in recycled aggregates and crushed concrete. Socrates Garrett ENT.com's recycled materials provide the construction industry with significant economic and environmental benefits by recycling clean concrete rubble into M.Dot grade rock materials. Recycled aggregates and crushed concrete can be applied to driveways, road construction, bank protection, parking lots, general bulk fills, and more. For more information, please call 601-896-0084 or visit us online at SocratesGarrettENT.com.
The Mississippi Link is an African-American female-owned newspaper with a trusted voice that is highly respected throughout the city, state, and nation. Our motto, keepers of the knowledge for people who speak the truth, since 1993. Link significantly influences the thoughts, attitudes, and buying decisions of its readers. Call us at 601-368-8481 for your advertising needs. If you would like to receive a newspaper in the mail each week, our annual subscription is only $52 per year. That is only $1 per week for you to stay informed regarding many stories that you can only get in the Mississippi Link. Sign up today at themississippilink.com and click on Home Delivery.
Welcome back to Socrates Garrett Live. We're having a critical conversation. It's a critical conversation. It needs to be had around a table in every black household. We need to spend some time dealing with this. Where we came from, how we got here, and when we got divided, and why it is we can't come together again. These are just basic questions that we got to answer and we got to solve before we can move forward. Obviously, we've hit a wall. We thought we were making some progress in the early 70s, and we thought we were moving into the middle class, and we thought that life was going to be better and that we were going to enjoy the benefits of full first-class citizenships. We were landowners, and we had property, we had some assets, and it seemed to be that we were on our way to being a full first-class American. When laws were passed that we could live anywhere we wanted to live, we could go in any restaurant, and we could eat with anybody we wanted to eat with, and we thought things were good and on their way. And here it is in 2023. African Americans are killing themselves at an alarming rate. Jackson, Mississippi was the #1 murder capital of the world 2 years ago. Every day we experience more crime committed blacks against blacks than any time in our history. You got to remember, in our communities, we lived, they weren't gated communities because we didn't have gates. We had some barbed wire gates. They were pretty much designed to keep the cow in and not try to keep me out. So there was a time when we didn't lock our doors. It wasn't necessary to lock your doors because nobody was still in, wasn't nobody going to kill you. But my, have things changed. We're now afraid of our children. We now don't know who they are. We look at them and we say, who are you? I don't even know this person. Things have changed. There's a reason for this great change, and things are out of order. We don't respect the order that things are supposed to be in. Now, we were talking about the differences in Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and why we got this divide. Doc was saying that white folk financed the NAACP. He said that the NAACP had white presidents. And why not if white folk financed it? And so he was saying that the plan was to keep the African divided. And many of you are aware of the Willie Lynch theory. And the Willie Lynch theory was the playbook on how you keep Africans divided. And if you keep them separated and divided, they will never be strong enough And Carter G. Woodson said, if you keep and train them right, you don't have to forbid them not to go to the front door. They will automatically seek the back door of your house or business. They will automatically seek that position in life if you keep them fighting with themselves. So you got to teach your children about the Willie Lynch theory, and you got to teach them about Carter G. Woodson. And you got to share with them how they got in this situation that they're in and how it's permeated and continues today. I'm going to bring you back a little bit. We talked about coming into the 21st century. All of those things we talked about are real, and they need to be retaught. But, Doc, we have a little school here called Tougaloo College. Now, Tougaloo is a fine school, probably one of the best universities that we have here in Mississippi. But it's Alcorn is a land-grant institution. White folks, I guess it was some kind of reform seminary or prison or something like that, but the white folk gave it to black folk and created Alcorn, and then Jackson State evolved and things of that nature. But Tougaloo stood out. It was a little bit different. As a boy, I knew that if I could make it to the gates of Tougaloo, that the police would not chase me on that campus. But, Doc, everybody that I ran into at Tougaloo was the same hue of Carter G. Woodson and the same hue of Frederick Douglass.
Exactly.
And Tougaloo itself had this relationship, and probably continues today, with Millsaps College, where they were sister institutions.
Well, that's the same problem. See, Tougaloo had, when I was young, had a white president. They just...
Hold it. Tougaloo?
That's right. Had white presidents up until, I believe, the 60s, the 1960s. Look at the old pictures. Go over there and look at on the wall. Look at the old pictures. They finally got them a black president. So they had the same thing as the other institutions. The white folks set up Tougaloo for a reason. I'm not getting into it unless you want to know the reason. They set up Alcorn for another reason.
I think based upon what you've said tonight and the discussion that we've had tonight, you find that white folk created places for their offsprings.
Of course, that's right. They had them in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Washington, D.C. A lot of those congressmen had to put their mulatto kids somewhere, so they put them over there at Howard University. Those that could pass for white, a few could go to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, and other places. But those that couldn't pass for white would go to Howard, Tougaloo, and others. And if you look at the book, and I mentioned this earlier, if you look at the black legislators that was put in office right after slavery, I looked at them just yesterday again. All of those guys in Congress were mulattoes. Look at them. People don't believe me when I just pulled the pictures of the black legislators in Washington, in the House and in the Senate, and we had several from Mississippi in big-time positions, senators. Look at them, mulattoes. So that means their father or grandfather at least had to be a slave owner.
Had to be a slave owner.
Had to be a slave owner.
And so
there were a few exceptions. There were a few blacks running around doing slavery that were called free, but they were sort of like I call the unwanted element in the community. They had laws against it. They too couldn't meet and greet each other in groups of no more than 2 or 3. They couldn't buy property. They couldn't even get certifications to do certain skills in the community. They couldn't do anything other than what they were allowed to do.
So, Doc, we get then that there is this divide. There's a divide inside of the African American community, and it was taught. It was specifically part of the plan that was designed to keep the Africans separated and apart so that they would not immense power. And so we brought it home and we brought it into even our beloved Eagle Queen we call Tougaloo College. My mother graduated from there. All of my sisters graduated from there. I was outcast. I went to Alcorn State University because I was seeking a different way than the traditional way. I would never been taught by white people, never been really touched by white people. When I came out of Farm Haven, Mississippi, all of my principals was black. My daddy was my idol. I idolized him. All of my teachers were black. When I left in that country in the 10th grade and I went down to Pineywood School and I ran into Lawrence Jones in the boarding school, and he was a black man. And I left Dr. Jones and I went down to Alcorn State University and I ran into Dr. Board, a strong black man. And so all of my nurturing and my teaching came from strong black folk. So I didn't really get this desire to be anything other than with black folk.
Let me tell you the reason why. Now, this is going to be sort of sensitive, and I don't want you to get upset about it. You just happen to be born a male, a black male. Now, if you had been one of the females in your family, you would have ended up at Tougaloo, because females listen to their mother and father. And I must admit, you have a little mulattoism in you too. So as a female, you would have been stuck over there at Tougaloo.
They all went. All of the girls went there. That's for sure.
You were independent.
Independent.
You love your daddy. You love black men. You want to see a difference. Your sisters didn't have that choice. They did what mom and daddy said.
Well, Doc, I hadn't thought about it, but there's a point there. We're gonna come back to that. So then we find this divide, and then we come into Jackson, Mississippi now. Jackson, Mississippi today has a population of 85% African Americans. We have a black mayor, Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, that is fighting with everything that he has to allow an African-American firm to have one of the largest contracts the city has ever offered, because they were the low bidder and because they've demonstrated that they could do the work. He has forward everything that he has to afford them that opportunity. And as a black businessman, an African-American businessman in this country, I know how important that is. I know that that's a glass ceiling that we gotta break. I know we gotta have African Americans that rise to the position that they are running our garbage collection service, that they're running our water and our wastewater plant, and that they're running our airports, and that they're running our schools. I know we gotta get them there. We made some deals in education we thought we had. We thought that we could be principals and we thought we could be college presidents, but we're getting awakened. Just last week in Mississippi, a black man was nominated to be the Secretary of Education in the great state of Mississippi, and he was denied with impeccable credentials. He was voted down by the white legislators. They did not want a black man to be in charge of education. Jackson State University has had 4 different college presidents in the last 6 years or so. So much dismantling and so much turmoil that it keeps the university from coming together because it's controlled by IHL, which is a white-dominated board that controls colleges and universities in the state of Mississippi. But in this African-American majority city, we have a 7-member city council, of which 5 are African-Americans. 4 males and 1 black female. But would you believe this? That Jackson, Mississippi has a white Republican president of its city council. That the black folk voted and selected and worshiped into power the only Republican in a 90% Democratic city is got a Republican president as its leader. Now, this just doesn't happen by accident. This happens because of the things we've been talking about. This happens because of the new man that was created and the strategies that puts us in place. And our African American children and adults don't even know what's happening to them. They don't even know that they have been orchestrated to act a certain way. And we think we're making decisions about where we're going to eat tonight. But white folk are making decisions on whether or not you're going to eat at all. And we don't know it. And we fight one another tooth and nail. We have 3 African-American black city council people that team with 1 white Republican city council person to deny a black man in a black city an opportunity to have a contract to pick up garbage. And he's not the first one. This denial has been going on for quite some time. I've experienced it personally as a business person in Jackson, Mississippi. Black folk took a contract from me as a black business person in Jackson and gave it to a white female-owned company out of Philadelphia, Mississippi. And I reminded them at the time, I said, this is the same city where Cheney and Goodman were buried alive. And you take a contract from a black man and give it to a white female company to haul biosolids in your own black city, your black county. But black folk did that. And now today, black folk deny Richards Disposal Service to have this contract. And they follow their white master. And we don't know why. And they don't even know why. They just think they have to do it at all costs. I've never seen anybody that would put their entire career and their status in the community on the line the way these people do today to support white folk. I've never seen this before. And Doc, I'm gonna get off of my little soap opera here, rampage a bit, but we gotta deal with it as to why African Americans can't see that they're destroying themselves.
Well, it's very simple. You know, I make things simple. Make it so simple people don't believe it. The African Americans can see and do know what they are doing. But when you get a semblance of power, you stay there and do whatever you can to keep your power base. And then your opponents, the people that want to control you, can look at you and say, this is the one. This is the person that sounds the weakest as far as his independence or her independence. This is who we're going to get on our side. So all you have to do then is call a meeting and put someone in charge of your agenda and get 2 or 3 people to come to you and you tell them what you can do for them. Some people that's in positions of responsibility are not happy with that position. If I were on the city council or county supervisor, one day I would want to rise and get a bigger position. If I were on the city council, I would probably want to be mayor in 2 or 3 years. In the supervisor position, county supervisor, I would probably want to run for the Senate or get a regional state job. And people know that. They look at your education training, who your parents were, and your economic position in society, and that's who they call the ones that's weakest in that area. Because according to the Jackson Advocate newspaper, they've already had some meetings in Jackson where they have attempted to disrupt the city government and take it over, and had some city council people there in the group to talk about it. And one revealed it to the mayor, and this person is in the newspaper, this week's edition of the Jackson Advocate, that gave this information to the mayor, And he said, of course, he was surprised. And he's supposed to say that, of course. And it was exposed because there are certain elements in the state of Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Alabama, Georgia, where these people say these Negroes, there are too many people in one area, they're not going to die out, we can't run them out, we don't want them in our gated communities, we don't want them in our nearby towns that's prospering, so we got to get these Negroes out of these majority cliques, and we got to take over these areas, because they got these old cities and towns. That's where we love to work. That's where our business and jobs are, and we like it. We want to get out of these suburbs and go back to the city. And these Negroes won't die. They won't leave. They won't vote the right people in office other than the ones we support, and we got to take it.
Now, Doc, we're going to continue this conversation because it's critically important, because we're going to solve this riddle. We're going to solve this riddle.
There is a solution to it.
Well, we sure need to hear what it is.
That's right.
And
It'll take me 2 hours to talk about it. I talked about it briefly earlier this week. But things can be changed in Jackson, Mississippi, and Hinds County in 30, 60, or 90 days to the point where you can have equity, and blacks will get more contracts than ever before, and all kind of things happen. But there are certain people got to be removed for various reasons from positions of responsibility. I'm not talking about all the people, just about 75% of them. And I'm talking about elected and appointed officials, certain preachers, and certain corporate leaders. They are working together to keep this imbalance from merging into a balance where the black people can rule their own destiny. And that's why you're not going to get another big contract in Jackson, Mississippi. You're going to have to go to Africa, Asia, Puerto Rico, and other places, because you're not part of that kind of scheme.
Look here, Doc. Our time has run out. I'm going to get another contract in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm going to get lots of contracts in Jackson, Mississippi, because we're going to teach our people. And this has got nothing to my friend Kim Wade over Kim.
Yeah, running for mayor of Jackson.
Yeah, but Kim, this has got nothing to do with white folk and black folk. You advocate for white folk, and you're doing a great job. This is for black folk to take care of black folk. And white folk expect you to take care of your own. They laugh when you don't. White folk know that when you learn to take care of yourself and to control your economy, that they won't have to take care of you anymore. And you won't need subsidies and food stamps and all of these other programs, because you're controlling your economy. Our message is for black folks to take care of black folks, as Doc says, to control your own destiny and to prepare the way for your children to have a great future. And to be proud African Americans in a town that you run and control, where the streets are clean, and we're together. We stand together against trouble in all times. But Doc, our time has run out. So any parting shouts for our viewers out there before we go?
All I want the viewers to know, Mr. Socrates, is the problems we are facing in Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, the United States, and Africa and Asia is a problem that is set up by black people not being independent, not being strong, not defending themselves economically, socially, and otherwise, not addressing the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Black folks don't want to bear arms. They want to be slaves. They don't want to protect themselves. And time a white person kill one, they holler and squall and pray, and then the cousin could go in their same community and kill 10. And they want to have one little prayer before they bury the person, and then still criticizing the enemy. That makes no sense. Black folks got to start doing what they need to do to take care of themselves. And then when you get that divide merged into a non-divide where you dictate to yourself that I'm going to have the means of production, distribution, and exchange and put it with my people, other folks will leave you alone. And if they come in my territory, I'm going to defend myself because I believe in the Second Amendment.
You heard it right here on We Believe Digital Broadcast Studio. This has been Socrates Garrett Live. Until next week, have a great weekend and stay safe. Good night.